Hey beloveds, welcome back to this episode of the Living Consciously podcast with me, Yvette Ratshikhopha, also known as Yvette Aloe on digital media. Today my guest is a psychologist who's been doing this work for 7 years. I ask a very important question, some of them which you've asked me on social media. We talk about everything from loss to relationships to healing your relationship with yourself, which I think is the most important one. So do stay tuned, watch till the end. Remember to like and subscribe and follow wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. Welcome again. And today I'm seated with Christel Roets, who is a psychologist and has been doing this work for 7 years. And, I'm so happy to have you here, because one of the things that I try to do is have professionals speak on certain topics, and there are questions that I don't think I can answer, as a life coach and all of that. And that's pretty much why I wanted to have you here. Welcome, Christel.
Thanks so much.
How are you doing?
I'm so good, thanks.
Okay, so thank you for agreeing to be here today. And I know that, you've had sessions today, but I think the first thing that most people would want to know about you is that, who is Christel? What do you do and who do you work with?
So thanks so much for having me and inviting me. I'm really excited to have this discussion and to just share with people. As you said, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been in this field for, when you asked me now earlier, I was like, is it 6-7 years around there?
Yeah.
And I predominantly, so I'm a psychologist. I also have a company that's called Psych Central, where we have a whole group of psychologists that practice there. So we've created this hub of people where we're just really able to help different people from different, diverse backgrounds with different kinds of problems. I specifically work with mostly adults and couples, so I don't see kids at all. Maybe sometimes a teenager here or there. And I work mainly with things like depression, anxiety, relationships, and grief, personality and how we function, dynamics in relationships, that kind of thing. So I'm really passionate about just understanding us as human beings, how we get through emotions, how we navigate this world that we live in.
Sure, and it is quite a world to navigate, hey? I think we're constantly going through things, if it's not loss, it's other new experiences, even if they're beautiful, like relationships, and then you get in there and you're like, oh, I don't have the communication tools, I don't know how to regulate my emotions. I don't know how to relate with people when I'm angry, things like that. So tell me, there's one question that I wanted to clarify before, we get into anything else. And this is a question that I get a lot, on social media. What's the difference between a clinical psychologist, a therapist, and a psychiatrist? That's something that I think a lot of people, who are looking for the healing work, I don't think they always know who to go to. So if you could explain that, I think that will be valuable to everybody listening.
I think so. If we start with just psychologists, you get different kinds of psychologists. Okay. You get a clinical psychologist who would work predominantly more with clinical disorders like depression, anxiety, bipolar, things like that. And then you get counseling psychologists. So there are psychologists who are trained to work a lot with life stresses, adjustments and changes that we go through. Although that and depression and anxiety often goes hand in hand. So it's also difficult to really distinguish the scopes so clearly. I think we all work with a bit of the same things. And then you get educational psychologists who work mainly with kids. So those are the three that you'll get in private practice most commonly. You get other kinds of psychologists as well, but they don't necessarily do psychotherapy. The term therapist, I think, is just more of a slang that we often use to describe someone that we go to for assistance in some form of counseling or therapy. And so you get creative arts therapists and music therapists who are not necessarily a psychologist, but they're still working with your emotional well-being and your healing. And so I think that it's very much of the same thing. The biggest difference and the biggest thing for people to really understand is there's a big difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So a psychiatrist is actually a trained doctor who can prescribe medication. So they go the whole route of studying medicine from scratch, doing everything exactly the same as a medical doctor would. And then after they've actually qualified, they would specialize as a registrar and train for, I think it's an additional, I'm talking under correction, 5 years as a psychiatrist then. So they then work specifically with medication related to mental health. And really that's the main difference.
And sometimes I think healing, because I know sometimes people are like, should I go to this? Should I go to this? Sometimes it can include all of them.
Exactly.
Like you need a psychiatrist, you know, to prescribe certain things to you. You need a psychologist so that you, or counseling psychologist so they can hear you, you know. You have a place to, you know, to voice your thoughts or emotions, etc. And you need somebody to help you, you know, unlearn certain behaviors, understand where they come from and all of that. So I think I really wanted to clear that question because I think people don't know where to start. You know, I think the most important thing is that you start somewhere. And as you move along, you'll find, you know, what's working for you and what's not working for you and figure that out. So tell me, how did you get into psychology? I mean, you look quite young. I don't think I asked you your age, and you've been doing this for 7 years. How did you get into it?
So I am quite young as a psychologist. I think though that I was very lucky in this process, working very quickly for me. So the whole process of becoming a psychologist is actually quite a volatile one. So a lot of people go and study psychology, but then you end up not actually qualifying as a psychologist because the process is just so difficult, and you really need to go through all of these selection processes and things for them to identify, okay, you are someone that, like, each university will train, I think it's about between 8 and 10 people per year to be a psychologist, and there's hundreds and thousands of people that's actually studying psychology and not able to do anything. So I was lucky that I had an experience when I was younger. That's when my interest started. I'm saying lucky, it was actually, I went through a very traumatic loss, and my parents took me to see a psychologist, and that was such a great experience for me. So it was something that was really meaningful, and since then I've always been having the idea that I want to become a psychologist. I thought that I'm going to work with kids, which I landed up never doing because I actually enjoy adult work so much more. But then this person really guided me in terms of this process. So I actually studied social work and became a social worker first and worked as a social worker. And while I was working at a shelter for abused women, then I did my honors in psychology. And I was lucky enough to get my selection for my master's initially in the first year that I applied. A lot of people end up having to go year after year and not being selected. And so, then I trained as a clinical psychologist. I worked at Sterkfontein Hospital, which is a psychiatric clinic or hospital that also does a lot of court work and forensic work, and at community clinics. And then I landed up in private practice because actually there's not that much job opportunities as a psychologist, so most people end up working for themselves, and from there it just grew to this space where I'm now with a lot of other psychologists.
Okay, thank you for explaining that journey. I think you mentioned going through a loss yourself. How did that impact you? You know, because you said that was a crucial part of, I guess, of you realizing maybe that this is the type of work that you want to do. How did it impact you in a way that now this is where you are in the work, this is the work that you're doing?
So I think I've always been a very empathetic person, even as a child, and really always enjoying helping people, being there for people, and being fascinated by just how we function. I think also emotions have never really scared me. I have a lot of emotions myself, and so I've always been quite comfortable with emotions and sitting with emotions. And so having this experience of someone helping me to make sense of what I've experienced and what I've gone through and what that means for the kind of person that I am now, I think that was a very impactful experience for me. And I probably might have ended up becoming a psychologist regardless, but I think that was something that gave me the option of, so this is actually something that you can do as a career and that you can add value to people's lives. And I think that building relationships with clients is actually the most valuable thing for me. So every day my job is about building relationships with people and about establishing that space for them where they can bring things that's really tough and we can sit with it together. And I think that's a big plus for me. Yeah. And that's part of what that experience with a psychologist myself have taught me.
Okay. All right. I think it's that, like, just building a connection so people can feel safe, you know, and trust you. And I think all the work that you do when you're working with people, it's about relationships, you know. So tell me, if somebody is going through a loss right now, right, and they've just lost somebody that's close to them, right, what is the process, what does healing look like, right? Because I think one of the key things I want to speak to you about today is mainly loss, because I know you do work around loss, around relationships, as well around, like depression, anxiety, and other mental health challenges. So maybe tell me if somebody is going through a loss, right? Because I know even with COVID and everything, a lot of people have, experienced loss. And then as a result, they also have anxiety and they have other, challenges as a result of that. What would you say is the process? What does healing look like if somebody comes to you and they consult with you?
I think the first thing, Yvette, that's really important for any listener that's going through loss to understand is that the process really looks different for each and every person. And that's the struggle that we have, because we want to have a recipe to say, okay, so I can understand there's all of these theories that help us to know what to expect, that there's different stages of grief that we'll experience. But even with the different stages, we can experience them all simultaneously.
Like
we can fluctuate between them. We can move from one, and then it's not now I'm done with anger and I'm moving on to the bargaining, or I'm moving on to the depression side. Like, it's something that can come and go. It's a wave that you're really riding. And for me, that's been very helpful to understand with loss is it is a wave. Sometimes it feels like a tsunami, and sometimes it feels like I'm just standing with my ankles in the water and they're covered, but I'm safe and I can handle this and it's okay and it's more bearable. So the process really is about finding a way to coexist with the loss. I think a lot of people have this idea that if we go for therapy, it's about helping me to accept that this person has, if we talk about loss, we often think mostly about someone passing away, right? And so we think about it's going to help me to accept that this person has died. But I think a lot of times we can never fully accept that this has happened and be okay with it. It's always going to be tough that it's happened. The process of therapy is there to help you to really learn to coexist with this pain and hurt that you're sitting with. Because life goes on, unfortunately, and your life goes on. And so it's not about saying, I'm going to get rid of the pain and then only I can live again.
Sure.
There's this very nice meme that people share often on social media where it's this ball that's in a glass jar. And grief and the process of grieving and processing a loss is not saying that the ball that's the grief is going to get smaller. The jar is going to get bigger, which is you. And you expand as a person and you learn how to navigate the world with this loss and this pain that you're sitting with.
You've explained that so beautifully. I've never heard anybody speak about grief in that manner where, sometimes it's a wave, sometimes it's a tsunami, it's a process. Because I think a lot of people try to rush themselves through grief, and they're very judgmental towards self in terms of, I shouldn't be crying anymore. It's been this amount of years. I shouldn't feel sad anymore, And of course, if you're in that deep sadness, then you definitely need, to consult and you need to speak to somebody. But I think it is like what you said, accepting, that, this has happened and I'm navigating through it, and it might look different every single day. Because I know with me, sometimes I do have like clients going through grief as well, and then, sometimes they just want to like fix it, fix it, I don't want to, and yes, I think most of the journey is that just grace for self, just approaching yourself with compassion and understanding that it's okay to respond in the way that you're responding to the loss in itself. You spoke about how, a lot of times when you speak about grief, when you speak about loss, we think of a loss of a loved one as in them passing on or transitioning to the next lifetime. So when we, what are the other type of losses that people can experience?
I think it's so vast, and I think we don't realize how often we actually experience loss in our lives. And so I think, especially while the number one thing that people don't often see as a loss is the end of a relationship, that's one of the most major losses that we go through repetitively in our lives.
Heartbreak.
It's heartbreak.
It's a loss, yeah.
And I always say sometimes it's even more complex in another way than someone passing away, because this person is still alive and there, But
They
they're
just don't want
choosing,
you.
yes.
So yeah.
So they're choosing to not be with you, or you choosing to not be with them. But then there's always this potential of, can I resuscitate this, and can it come alive again? And what does that mean? This decision. Whereas with death, it's very final and it's very violent, because it's a violent removal of, this person was there 1 minute and now they're not. But you don't have to deal with the decisions and the what ifs necessarily as much. And so relationships is the number one thing. It's also not just romantic relationships. So friendships ending, not having the parent that you needed is also a loss. Growing up in a home environment that didn't necessarily acknowledge you as a person or see you for who you were and provided you emotionally with what you needed, that's also a loss. So I think on a relationship level, we experience multiple losses in our lifetime, and I think we almost get trained to deal with it a bit better as we get older, because we've been through it and we've seen we can actually survive it. We also deal with losses in terms of losing a job, or maybe just losing an opportunity for a job that might have been like your career, pushed in a different direction or something like that. It can also be a loss. So loss and disappointment often goes hand in hand. Disappointment is just a smaller loss. It's not necessarily always on the same level. I think also, if we think about things like becoming a parent, you're gaining something, but you're losing a whole part of yourself as well.
Yeah.
You're becoming a different version. And even when I had a baby recently, I told my husband, just before she was born, I told him I was all emotional and hormonal, but I told him, we're never going to just be us again. It's never just going to be the two of us. Even if our baby's not physically there, mentally she's always going to be with us. And so it's a loss of transitioning to just being a romantic partner to becoming parents and partners in that way. Sure. And so I think we can come up with endless examples of loss that we have to go through, but we are constantly morphing or transitioning into a new version of ourselves. And so loss is not always as painful. It's not always as hard to get over. It's sometimes also actually empowering us in a way and allowing us to not stay the same person.
I think, with the recent losses that like I've experienced, that's exactly what it is, like just realizing that life, you can get to the other side. It is very difficult when you're going through it, but you can get to the other side. I remember when I was writing my book, like one of the chapters is on loss, and I was writing it, and I hadn't lost anybody, not a single like close family member, and that was like about 5 years ago, I don't remember. And I was like, okay, who am I to write about loss? Because I knew it and I understood it, I've worked with clients that have experienced loss and all of that, but I'm like, what's my personal experience? And I realized my first experience was the loss of my childhood as I expected it to be, being a child, wanting to grow up. And one of the losses I actually wrote about was the loss of being a daddy's girl. Like I never got to be that, because of the type of childhood that I had. And that's when I realized that there are different types of losses, even the loss of a vision, if you wanted to be married by a certain age, you wanted a certain lifestyle by a certain age, the loss of an opportunity, like what you said. And I think, it's quite important that people see it as a loss so that they can grieve it. And then when you grieve it, then you can allow a new picture to kind of like come into your life, and what you like, as what you said, your character expands, who you are expands, the jar gets bigger and all of that. So I also really like that analogy that you gave, right? So what are some things that you'd say are helpful for somebody, or affirmations that are helpful for somebody that is going through a loss?
I think first of all, it's just about starting with believing that you can survive it.
Sure.
We are so resilient as human beings, but we often have this idea that I just can't get through this, and this pain is just too much. And I guess with some losses, the pain is even like physically in your body. So like if you've lost a baby, or if you've lost a really close partner or loved one or parent, that loss is a visceral thing that you also go through, and that pain is very real. But it's about knowing that you can survive that, and that that you are becoming a different version of yourself. So I think the affirmation can be really around whatever that might look like for someone, is that I've survived another day, I will survive the next day, although I don't know how yet at this point. I think that there's a lot of just power in that acceptance. I think it's also really important for people to not go into the should and shouldn't. Like, well, I shouldn't still be feeling this way, or what does this say about me if I'm so devastated by this relationship ending? Like, I'll hear a lot of people saying, I'm going through this breakup, but I shouldn't be crying about this. I shouldn't be feeling this way.
Can I add to that? Especially when it was an unhealthy relationship. That's where people are like guilting themselves because why do I miss this person that caused me so much harm? Even if it's a loss of a parent that didn't treat you well, that you didn't have a connection with, So I think that's quite important. Yeah.
But that ties in with what you also said earlier, Yvette, about the loss of maybe aspirations or hope. So when you are losing a toxic relationship or even losing an abusive relationship, you're losing the hope that it could have gotten better.
I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah. And that's what we hold on to. That's what keeps us in a toxic relationship, is the potential of who this person can become. Maybe one day they'll love me. Maybe one day they can respect me if this and this is in place. And if that relationship ends, that's also out the window. So that we lose that hope.
I really think that's an awakening, because I always say, like, grieve all your losses, grieve the vision that you wanted for the relationship, even if it's unhealthy, all of that stuff. But I think just the realization of that link, that yes, it's also because you're grieving what you wanted the relationship to be. And I think even to stay in a unhealthy relationship, you're holding on to it because you have the vision, not you're not looking at the picture for what it is, not what you're experiencing on a daily, but really just what you're hoping for. So that actually makes a lot of sense. Thank you for explaining that. What are some physical symptoms that somebody might experience when they're going through a loss?
Loss can, as I say, it's such a physical thing that it can impact us so physically. So I always say we need to look at our vegetative functioning, and what that refers to is our sleeping and eating and energy levels. So sleep is the number one indicator of your mental health and that you're not in a good space. If you're needing to sleep much more than usual, if you are having interrupted sleep, if you are just feeling drained despite sleeping 12 hours, for example, or it might be that you are having insomnia and you are not able to sleep more than 2 hours a night. Either one of those are indicator that you are actually not functioning well emotionally. And so we need to understand that your sleep is not going to be the same. Changes in your appetite. Some people overeat, some people really lose their appetite and they'll lose a lot of weight. And then also things like your memory and concentration. And so I think that's really important if someone's going through a loss, any kind of loss, that you need to understand you're not going to be able to be as productive as you would have usually been. So you can't perform at work at 100% as you would have been just before you've experienced this loss. We're hoping that that's not going to be for an extended period of time. And if it is, that becomes problematic. But your memory and your concentration is affected by loss. And so you can't focus on things the way that you would have usually. You can't be really absorbing as much, and your critical thinking will be affected as well. So your problem solving and all of those things will not be the way that it used to be. And you need to give your body enough time to recover and to really just work through this loss with you as well. It's not just a mental thing. I think it's really important for people to take care of themselves physically. And so that's maybe also why even when there's usually a death in a family, people will bring food. I think people bring food for other reasons,
you forget to eat as well.
But you forget to eat. And so just having that nourishment of someone providing you with a meal and someone making sure that you are getting the nutrients that you need.
okay.
It makes such a big difference.
I genuinely thought, I was like, yo, we love spending money. Hey, like all the scones that you get and everything, you know, but it actually makes sense if you're saying, because I mean, your community is coming to give that care, you know, because when you're in that state of loss and you can't do a lot of things for yourself, so they're offering emotional support, and then they're nurturing you as well so you can take care of your body. I guess it's also just being mindful of, you know, what we're eating at that period as well, you know, just to aid the healing and the process, etc. But that makes a lot of sense, you know, just nurturing your body as well. And also when you spoke about the focus, of course, if your sleep is interrupted, your focus and energy levels will also be interrupted. So there's a huge link between that as well, you know, just noticing that sleep is the first thing to actually go, I like that. Because I know when my sleep gets interrupted, right? And I'm a nocturnal person. I stay up quite late, etc. So it's very often very difficult for me, you know, to tell when my sleep is off. But I notice I'm not getting the sleep quality that I used to get. You know, then the neck pains start, the shoulder pains, and then I'm like, okay, there's something. I might be stressed and I'm not aware. I might be going through something and I'm not processing, or, you know, I might, you know, something is not right. So thank you for mentioning that. There's an element of your work that I want to talk about, which is relationships, right? What, in terms of, you know, the is it couples there? What do you call it, counseling that you do, you know, what are some of the main things that couples struggle with when in your sessions?
So I think if we talk about working on relationships, there's couples that come to therapy working on relationships, and there's actually a lot of individuals that land up in individual therapy because of their relationships. And so the relationships are relevant, whether it's you sitting there alone or whether it's you coming as a couple, because most people need guidance or help in understanding how they are relating to other people and how other people are impacting them. So it's really actually almost inevitable that relationships will be a part of, whether you're working with trauma or depression or anxiety, any of those things, it becomes part of the therapy. And I'm really passionate about people understanding how they are interacting with each other. With couples come for various reasons, but I think the main reason is often struggling to find a way to coexist. So couples find themselves, whether it's with regards to finances or sex, because sex is a big thing in a lot of relationships, where couples are mismatched or not really meeting each other's needs, whether it's about other family relationships and outside relationships that's playing a role. Okay. It's about the couple getting to a point where they're saying, well, we don't know if we can coexist because neither one of us are willing to budge. Mm-hmm. And so it's about, a lot of couples actually come with the expectation that the therapist is going to tell them, you are right and you are wrong. And a lot of people are very, yes.
Yeah.
And people are often very disappointed when maybe one partner came in, they were like, you're going to tell him that he's wrong.
Yeah.
And now you're not doing that. So often people just want to be heard. And I think that people are really in relationships struggling to hear each other, because we get so caught up in the who's right and who's wrong, and what does this mean if I have to admit that, yes, maybe sometimes I'm selfish. We'll fight that and we'll show all of the evidence that it's not the truth, and we get caught up in that process so much. So I think obviously there's so many things that happens with couples. Boundaries is a really big part of work with couples, and I think trust is one of the biggest things, not just with infidelity. So most couples that end up in couples therapy need to work on trust in some level. So it might be about, can I trust you with my emotions? Can I trust that you can be a safe space for me? Can I trust that you'll be reliable and show up for me? That's really a major part of, I think, any work with couples.
I think one of the things that people really undermine is that, like, trust, but the safety element, you know? Safety, you know, in terms of how we communicate with each other, safety in terms of how you make decisions and maybe don't include me, you know, safety just in terms, and it's always the small things, you know, or sometimes even big things, but you find that it's the small things that make a person feel safe, you know, and I think that's something that people don't pay attention to, because when I work with my clients, I'm always like, you know, like the ones that are looking to have a new relationship and have it healthy, I'm like, what does emotional safety look like? So that when it comes into your life, you're able to recognize it and say, this is safe, this is not safe, because a lot of people get into situations or relationships whereby they realize that they don't feel heard, which makes them therefore feel unsafe. They don't feel like they can trust the person, which makes them feel unsafe because they feel like they'll be hurt in the relationship. So I think safety is one important element as well, along with everything else that you said, like trust, and then feeling heard, communication and all of that. So then there's the relationship with self, right? What are some key things that you think can help somebody with their relationship with themselves?
I think ultimately it's so beautiful that you're mentioning that, because I think ultimately that's the process of therapy, is about working on your relationship with yourself. And if I think about relationship with yourself, I think it's really about understanding what are the rules that you have for yourself, what are the expectations that you have of yourself, and what's the empathy that you have with yourself. I often speak to my clients and I'll mention, you have to feel more sorry for yourself. And they'll be like, but I don't want to pity myself, and I don't want to go and sit in the corner and just be like in this misery. And that's not what it's about, but it's really about understanding and acknowledging that this is something that I've experienced and this is really hard for me, and honoring yourself in that regard. And so I think the relationship with self is, I always go back to our inner child, because that's where your relationship with yourself starts. And as a young child, it's our interactions with our world that informs us to say, this is what you need to do to be accepted. This is what you need to do in order to get love. And we form these narratives around, I need to always be available for people, then they'll love me. If I am never having any negative feelings, then I will be accepted and then I will be cared for. If I always perform, then I'll get love. So we have these beliefs that govern the rest of our lives, and it's based on our very early experiences. But if you're an adult, you wouldn't necessarily ask a 7-year-old for advice. Yet we are still following the conclusion that the 7-year-old came to.
Sure.
And so I think with relationship with self, we really need to dig very deep to understand on a logical level. A lot of people will say, but I know that this is not the truth. But emotionally, we're feeling a different way. And it's because it's not based on where you are right now. It's based on all of these experiences that you've had that has led to you coming to certain conclusions and beliefs. And we need to uncover that and understand that in order to rectify some of that or repair a lot of that. So maybe also relationship with self is a lot about reparenting yourself.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense, right? Because there's a quote that I once read when I was just reading up work on, parenting and, the healing the inner childhood as well. And I forgot who it's by, because I know he wrote a book that I like. But it's one of those, are you going to let a 4-year-old run your life forever? Right? And it's that, when you're triggered, that 4-year-old comes in and it's like, hey, we're safe. We got to run. We got to leave. They're going to hurt us. When you're scared that people will reject you, you go to that 4-year-old. It's like, okay, we must perform now, in order to be loved. We're not good enough. All those limiting stories, or scripts that people have that they kind of carry through life. And I totally agree with you. It's those limiting beliefs that we need to unlearn, and then therefore as a result, improve our relationship with self and therefore also with the world and the people around us. So thank you for that. I think a lot of people that are listening, might be in a space that, they need to improve on their relationship with themselves. And I think saying that, look at the story that you're telling yourself about yourself. Do you treat yourself? It's funny because you said that whole, feel sorry for yourself, and I always say to my clients when they're crying, they're like, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, it's good. You should have compassion for yourself. You should, somebody has to feel for that 4-year-old, that 7-year-old. That's probably why you're where you are now, because nobody showed you compassion, nobody showed you kindness, and it's good that you're feeling compassion and finally feeling that emotion for your inner child or for those experiences that you went through as a child. So yeah, I love that point. Okay, so before we kind of end this conversation, I don't really want to because there's so much we can get from you, but what would you say, to somebody who's on the healing journey? What would you say to them?
I would say to be patient with yourself. And I think that we need to really, it's so good that you're using the word, the healing journey. We need to see it as a journey. I think it's actually something that we never achieve fully, and that we're always continuously busy with for the rest of our lives. And I think a lot of people put so much pressure on, but I need to fix this right now. If it took you 30 years to become this person, you're not going to undo that in 3 months' time of whatever you're busy doing, whether that's coaching or therapy. We can work on some things and we can actually see some change quicker, but our default has been set. And so we'll really have to give ourselves the time and the patience to say, I know that I'm going to go back to that. I know that I'm going to want to repeat that cycle again, or that interaction, or whatever that the problem is that you're sitting with. I'm giving myself the understanding and the opportunity that when I go back there, I'm prepared for how I'm going to get out of that quicker, how I'm not going to stay there, how I'm going to treat myself differently in that scenario. So it's an opportunity for you to continuously learn how to do things differently and to show up for yourself. So I always say to my clients, you need to be patient with yourself and with me and with the process, because it's something that's not going to happen overnight. And that doesn't mean that help is or change is not going to be there at all. But if you are 10% less of whatever you are experiencing currently, you are already in a different space. So if you're 10% less depressed, 10% less anxious, 10% less overwhelmed, you are already more functional, and that's already worth something. The goal is maybe that you need to do it 50% less. But if you are a pleaser, for example, you're never going to not be a pleaser. You need to accept that it's okay, but if I please 50% less, then there's much more room for myself, and it's not just about other people.
I like that. Just like putting percentages to it and being like, okay, there's been growth, there's been improvement, and every day is progress, so I like that. It's a journey. It's, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I know a lot of people are like, is it going to take me to another 20 years to unlearn this, and it's like, no, it's not going to take another 20 years. It's not, if you're 40 years old and you're starting the healing work, it doesn't mean it's going to take another 40 years, but it is just really having that patience for yourself. It does take time to unlearn certain things, especially if, there's trauma and other experiences linked to it, but as much as behavior is learned, it can be unlearned.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you for that. I think, what would you say, like, what are your personal mantras right now that are getting you through the day?
My personal mantras, well, they change, I guess, based on where I'm at. But I think for me currently, it's about protecting my own energy. And so I'm very mindful of what I'm allowing into my space, what I'm spending my energy on, and what that means to prioritize myself and my mental well-being and my emotions. And I think that that's something that can sound very selfish, but I think that that's something that people really need, is to be able to say, it's about me first, and then I have so much more to give to other people. Then I have so much more to offer in relationships. I'll have more capacity instead of kind of being very self-sacrificial. So for me, that's where I'm at now. Maybe a week ago, it might have been a whole different story.
That's a nice mantra, just prioritizing your well-being. And sometimes I'm like, fill your cup for yourself. Like, it doesn't even have to be to pour into others. You can just fill it up and be like, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep this to myself. And, just use my energy for me, to get through life and through to the daily challenges, or to just be here and stay in my energy. It's okay. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. I think you're the coolest psychologist I've seen with tats.
Thanks so much for having me.
And they're so pretty with flowers and everything. Thanks. So I actually absolutely love your energy and everything that you've brought to the table today. And I think also the listeners took a lot, just learning about healing, loss and relationships. And so where can people find you if they want to, work with you or find more about your work, Psych Central and everything? Yeah.
So we have a website, psychcentral.co.za, or they can follow us on, we have Instagram, Facebook, all of the social media, where our handle is @PsychCentralSA.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Psych Central SA.
SA.
All right. So do follow everybody. Do follow Christel. Yes, on social media, and check up all those pages. I think I'll post them as well in the caption. For those of you watching on YouTube, check out the caption, and also on every other platform that you may be watching or listening to this. And yeah, I guess thank you for coming. And I also want to thank you guys for joining in today to this conversation. I hope that you took so much away from it. But I think one thing is that it's a journey. Right? It doesn't happen overnight, and it's just about being intentional, of course, and knowing that it's okay to prioritize your well-being, being mindful of what's happening in your body, and being present enough to notice those changes, and most of all, just being kind to yourself. So thank you for joining us, and that's it from us today. Cheers.